Hello, I believe we are live on Facebook and we have Andrew Balfour here with us today. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank
It is
you.
so good to have you here.
Thank you. Tanzi, Annie, bonjour. Uh, Hi.
Hi, how are you doing?
Oh, that's probably the big question that we're all asking ourselves the last 3 months.
Yeah.
It's been like an odyssey, I think. This last 3 months for all of us. I got into Toronto March the 17th, and that was probably just a couple of days before the big shutdown. So, who would have thought? A year ago, when Toronto was in the midst of the Raptors and summer and millions of people, and then a year later. So it certainly has been interesting for myself, my partner, family, and friends, and for the whole world. So
Yeah.
it's certainly been surreal.
Surreal is right. It seems like no one would have believed us if we'd said a year ago, like you said, this is where we would be. What
Mm.
have you been up to? How have you been coping, and what's been keeping you busy in all this?
Well, again, if you had told me before this all happened that I would have an opportunity to be isolated for 3 months and have time to create and write and think, I would have thought that would have been glorious. Last couple of years for my career and myself have been pretty intense and a lot of work. But like so many of us artists and creators, I think that this has been a very difficult time. First of all, you want your health and you want to stay safe, and you want to, for family and your partners, you want to be supportive. So I would say that the first 2 months have been kind of a write-off for me as a composer.
Mm.
um, uh, you just get into your daily routine. It's sort of like Groundhog Day for the first couple of months. It's like over and over again. And I'm also a bit of a news junkie, so sometimes I felt that was a bit intense, considering the layers of what has been happening over the world. It's been really both concerning, horrifying, terrifying, sad. But I don't know. I think in the last month I've actually turned where I feel happy. I'm quite. I feel like I have hope and optimism, and for myself, for music, for the communities that we're in, but there's also a certain sense of loss, and
Yeah.
as a choral person yourself, it's like I feel that it's a pretty big tragedy. This idea of our choral communities are isolated and separated, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. I don't know when we'll get back to doing what we love to do so much.
Yeah.
Um, it's pretty intense, and I'm still mourning for that.
It's
I have
very
been listening.
intense.
I have been
Overwhelming.
listening to. Yes, overwhelming is probably the best word.
Mm. Well, you're not the first person I've heard say this. It's just living day to day has been a challenge. Getting groceries, takes a whole day, and it's really challenging. And for those of you watching who don't know, Andrew is an incredible composer and is writing for groups all over the country, orchestras, choirs, chamber groups, everything. He's also the artistic director of Camerata Nova, which is one of the most innovative choirs in the country, I think, and really spearheads some quite amazing projects. So you mentioned optimism and that there's been this sort of shift. I feel a little bit the same. It was really mournful and challenging to kind of imagine what this means for choral music. Um, but recently, with all of the connection and getting to talk to my friends like you, and we've had several phone conversations over the pandemic, just talking about the future and what might be possible. What are you feeling optimistic about, or what are you brainstorming for the future while we're kind of coming out of this?
Well, before this all started, I had a major project with Camerata Nova, and a collaboration with Indigenous artists, Chris Dirksen, Elliot Britton, and myself and Zoe Roy. Have and its project's called Captive, and it was each individual composer's creator's idea of the word captive, whether it's incarceration or captive because of addiction. But this idea was formulated way before all of this was happening. So once we went into lockdown and all our artists started to say we need to rethink what we're doing, because we all feel captive, whether in our homes or isolation. So that's kind of my major project right now. Over this, I've been thinking about certain world issues, social issues, and I think that this is an opportunity to sort of to rethink things, and how to approach projects. So we're hoping that we can do this in winter. We were originally supposed to do it in last month, and then it got kicked up to September, and we realized September is not going to be possible. So we're hoping that we can do this project in winter, and this will be the fourth of our Truth and Reconciliation series. So we've done 3 projects before, so this is number 4. So but I think, again, this, with all the times we're in right now, I think that we're going to be seeing more poignant, more thoughtful projects and creations for decades. Who knows? Like, in terms of what we're going to be seeing, and what we're going to be listening to in the future, and what are the subjects we're going to be listening to. So that's sort of my sense of optimism. And now that it's turning into summer here in Toronto, Ontario, I do wake up every morning feeling very happy and optimistic for the most part. Sometimes it's not so much when I pick up a paper or watch the news. It's not so much, but I think it's important that we're still all in this together as an artistic community. That's very important to me and to all of us, I think.
That's so inspiring. Tell me about this. Tell me a little bit more about your Truth and Reconciliation project with Camerata Nova, and why is it important for choirs to engage with Truth and Reconciliation? What is our role as choral musicians in furthering that conversation?
Well, I know for the last, we have had a difficult legacy and history with the government and the colonial people of Canada, with the First People or Indigenous peoples. And this is a very delicate subject, and I understand why some choral conductors or choristers are approach this with trepidation. But I think that it's important to sort of, even if you're browsing, but if you look at the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation, this is exactly one of the issues they bring up, is a greater awareness. We're not, asking people to go deep down into the history, legacy of residential schools or murdered and missing women or addictions or clean water. But these are issues that are important, I think, and what I can do, because I'm not a social activist, or I'm not a lawyer or a doctor, but I'm a musician that wants to bring light to this. And I think that even if you're a non-Indigenous choir, if you're not an Indigenous conductor or a chorister, that these are still important issues that we can bring awareness to ourselves and our community. So I've done my first major sort of Indigenous project was called Wawatewak, and it was I called it at the time an Indigenous oratorio. And Wawatewak means Northern Lights. And that project was sort of based on a libretto that I wrote that was about a young Cree girl 400 years ago that was flung into the future by a trickster, and suddenly ends up in present day downtown Winnipeg, and can only be seen by street people. She's kind of, nobody else can see her. So, and that sort of led to this idea of, I want to collaborate more with Indigenous artists, not necessarily Indigenous classical artists or what have you, because when I started 25 years ago, there weren't many, classically trained Indigenous people, but there were still incredible artists and creators. So our mandate is to bring in more Indigenous either creations and collaborations, but also to have more sort of voices within our organization that can give us that Indigenous perspective. I'm a 60s scooper. I did not grow up with my culture and blood. Thankfully, I grew up in a wonderful family. I grew up in an Anglican church that sang wonderful music. I went to England a bunch of times on tour with them. So I had a very unique perspective and a very fortunate upbringing that guided me into music. So for me, it's important that these collaborations continue, and I'm seeing a greater awareness across the country, whether it's an orchestra or opera companies or chamber music. I'm seeing a more of awareness for people to listen, and that's, I think, the most important thing for this collaborative spirit, cross-cultural projects is the respect and listen that needs to be happening. Um, I think that I've seen a lot in the past of arts organizations checking off the box
Mm-hmm.
for grants because, oh, we're doing an Indigenous piece or an Indigenous influence piece. It's been slow to come back to where we need to be as a sort of community and creators. But I think the future right now, not just cultural, but is more collaborations within our choral community. That is the future. I think whether we're this situation has made us to go that direction, but I think it's vital for all our survival.
Collaboration. That's the number one.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a lot of Canadian choral conductors that tune into our live stream here. So if you were to give any advice, if there's a choral conductor out there or a choir organization who's never engaged in subjects of truth and reconciliation or never begun an Indigenous collaboration or collaboration with an Indigenous artist, what advice would you give them at the very beginning of that process?
Well, I understand the trepidation, and I think that the one thing I would say is that where, regardless of where you are in the country or what community, is that you'll always be able to find some type of Indigenous perspective, whether it's an elder or an Indigenous musician, and also the important. I mean, this is the big A word: appropriation. There's still very little repertoire that comes from an Indigenous perspective in the choral world. And that's, it's unfortunate, and I understand too, especially if you're dealing with a language or a culture that you don't know, that you don't want to feel you're being disrespectful or appropriating. But slowly I think that's changing. I see sort of this idea of again going back to the listening and just sort of well thought out programming, but it's there's a lot of things in the past that are difficult too. I'll give you the best example I can think of is the Huron Carol. It's been sung. It's part of the mosaic of Christmas time, and particularly in this country. But Huron's a derogatory word. It's away at people. And I think that even the mode of that piece is kind of like considered to be, Indian or native or what have you. Not that I'm downplaying, or trashing that particular carol or people that sing that carol, but it's just an example of sort of being aware of, like, a lot of people say, well, I didn't know that was, derogatory. It's a lot like saying the E word, Eskimo, or, for Inuit. So that's an awareness that I think is important. There are more resources right now, I think, for choral conductors. I'm fortunate enough to have a couple of pieces published by Cyprus. And one of the big ones, I guess, was Umbe, that certainly I didn't expect it to take off like that. But that was an important piece because, one, I don't speak Ojibwe. I'm actually Cree background, but the piece is in Ojibwe. But I was able to work and with an elder from Winnipeg called Corey Campbell, who is a wonderful man, wonderful musician, wonderful activist with the Indigenous community. And we did it very, very carefully. And it was spearheaded by Kathleen Robbins from the University of Manitoba, who really I consider to be a strong ally. She made sure that the language was proper, that it was presented properly in print, the editing was done, the working with and being advised by Corey. I think those were a lot of steps. It took a lot of work for a 3-minute piece. But as a result, whenever I hear it, not just because it's my piece, but the spirit and the respect that it is sung and worked on is very powerful. And there are a lot more right now Indigenous composers coming up that we're going to be seeing their names a lot more. And to me, that's going back to the optimism. I just feel so grateful and happy to see a new generation of Indigenous composers. So, in the next couple of years, we're going to be seeing more of those names, and I think we're going to have more material out there for choral conductors and choristers.
And education and resources, like you say. I've performed Ambe with a choir in Vancouver, and I remember the notes. They're so detailed, and the pronunciation is all transliterated, and it's very easy as a conductor to make all of those very careful decisions when you're approaching a piece like that, when the resources are published with the score. And it by giving that amount of detail in the publication, you're inviting that level of engagement, I think. And it's wonderful. I hadn't seen anything like it. We've also performed your vision chant. I've performed that as a member of the Canadian Chamber Choir, and I also programmed it with the Western Singers at Western University this year. And could you tell us a bit about that piece? I know I'm putting you on the spot here. I didn't.
It's okay.
I'd be asking you about that piece. But it's an incredible work, and now it's available on the CCC's recording. What were the origins of that one?
Well, actually, that was a specific commission, and it's part of a movement from a larger work called Bawajigewan, which is vision or chant and vision quest, and this idea of it's a 3-movement work, and it was originally commissioned by the Kingston Chamber Choir. Gordon Sinclair still is the director there, and that happened in 2014. And I actually, again, going back to the people that are allies and careful programming, Gordon did a lot of research and did a lot of reaching out to his local community around the Kingston area, and put together a wonderful program of Indigenous flute players, drummers, dancers, and it was sort of like anchored with this Bawajigewan. And I was really impressed. I went there for a week to conduct it, and I actually he set up where I'd go every day to schools in the daytime and work with kids. Meet local elders and members. So I use that as sort of a high example of somebody that doesn't have that perspective, that actually did the extra work. And really, for that week was really important. Most of my stuff that I write Indigenous is actually original in terms of I don't use old chants or my influence, as you know, is Renaissance polyphony and Baroque music, and it's still probably one of my greatest loves. But I certainly feel that there is a sense of truly collaborative efforts by choral conductors. I don't want to be name dropping all the time, but another one that's I worked with quite well is David Follis here in Toronto, who actually has made the effort. Even before I met him, he was taking Ojibwe courses and knows actually First Nations language better than I do. And so I feel that I've been very fortunate. And I also know that you could, just to go back to the publication of Umbe, as opposed to the hard copy of Vision Chant, is that there is no, I hope to get that published. It will be published probably within the next year through Cypress, but there's no explanation. And as soon as choristers see like the hey ya, there's a little bit of trepidation and a little bit of nervousness, because is this appropriation? Is this so I have to do a lot of explaining when conductors contact me, and I understand that, and I actually respect that concern. But again, I don't pretend that I know the language, and I'm not trying to do stereotypical things. I'm quite proud of that piece, actually, and I know the CCC recording very, very, very honored, because it sung so well. Actually, one of my next projects is to do a hip hop version of that, to have the choir and then have a beat, hip hop beat, because I was listening to it in the park a couple of weeks ago on my laptop, and just behind me somebody was playing a beatbox, and the beat, the rap went perfectly with the Vision Chant. So I got like one of those aha moments. It's like, I'm going to do a hip hop version with this piece. So
that's so cool.
It would be a lot of fun.
I want to chat with you offline about that, because I have a hip hop collaboration coming up, actually.
Oh, awesome.
So we'll share notes.
Excellent.
Wow, amazing. What was your favorite? You've talked about a number of commissions and a number of processes. What commissions stand out for you in your career, and why were they so fruitful?
Well, I guess just because these things are fresh in my mind, but last fall was pretty special. I felt like, for me, tassel music commission, which was pure joy, because I grew up with tassel music, and I grew up with that style of period authentic instruments. What a thrill! It was
amazing. I was there. It was just totally stunning. Yeah.
It certainly was kind of oh my God, I can't believe I'm experiencing this moment, and that was just pure fun. But I think the Mendelssohn Choirs Commission with David Follis and the Toronto Symphony was pretty special because that was indigenous piece, whereas the Tafu music wasn't indigenous influenced. And just working with somebody like David was really powerful. But I have to say I've been really lucky because almost all my projects I'm happy and proud and very honored to be able to be able to have worked with these musicians and organizations. And again, even though we're on a downtime right now, is that I'm still looking forward to things in the future. I've done an opera with the Highlands Opera Company with Richard Martinson and Valley Cuenca and Opera Atelier from Montreal. That was fun and learning experiences. So these are all things that I never expected 25 years ago. I wrote a little piece. My first piece that I wrote was a piece called God Be in My Head, about a minute and a half. I just hammered up a couple of chords on the piano and then and that thought, well, that's fun. I never would have thought 25 years later that that it would lead to this. I was originally a trumpet player and I studied at university, so I thought I was going to be an orchestral trumpet player, but you never know.
Have you written for trumpet?
No, actually I've written for brass, a brass ensemble, but I always sometimes think that maybe I'll write a trumpet concerto, but you never know. I as a composer, and you're probably the same thing, things come your way that you don't plan on. Whether it's for string quartet or for high school choir or for orchestra, you just never know. I have a big commission with the Winnipeg Symphony for the New Music Festival in January, and that's going to be probably my biggest orchestral commission yet. So that's sort of my project.
Long one, right? That's a big
yeah, it's about 30 minutes I think they want.
Wow.
Which will be really exciting. They're doing a really very, very exciting project with Red Sky, based out of here in Toronto, and my piece. So we'll see. I mean, it seems like so far away, and that was my big summer project. But it's hard to, I think that we've talked about this before, and other composers. Throughout this time, we've lost our sense of urgency with deadlines because we don't know when things are going to happen. So it's hard to sort of like get up and say, I want to spend 3-4 hours composing today, which I originally thought was going to happen. But of course, life, the universe sometimes turns different ways. So, but
Speaking for myself, I know that's the last thing I need is less urgency when it comes to composing.
Definitely, I'm actually, I need that deadline. I need that sort of sense of like urgency. However, there's also something to say about contemplative times, which I feel that we are in right now. And I'm thinking a little bit more through things like this captive project that I talked about. I'm thinking a little bit more deeper where I want to go next with this project. So, and social issues right now, I think are very important. I think we're going to be seeing more of that by composers and artists. Is that we're going to be, it's important that before all this happened, Indigenous people were already isolated. They were already in sort of lockdown mode with, no clean water in the reserves, exorbitant prices for food and bad food, processed food, addictions, suicide rates. So, I mean, that is a reality that's been happening since, colonial Canada started. And the idea of reservations for First Peoples. So we're certain, like in terms of idea, like dealing with viruses and diseases, this is something, a legacy that First Peoples have had for a long time. So not that sort of like this is what it's all about, but I feel that I want to see more about that talked about, and I want to see clean water in First Nations. And I want to see a greater awareness and compassion to First Nations communities from all levels of government. But honestly, I've always said this before, governments are not going to solve these problems for First Peoples. They're not mandated that way. They're not structured that way. It's a 4-year mandate for governments. So we as collectively as Canadians, and I think artists can lead the way, that will make the changes that we need to be a true community of peoples and colors in this country. And we're kind of upside down now, in the last couple of weeks for that. but I still see a way that discussion will continue once we get through this sort of immediate concern about a virus and pandemic. Um,
Yeah.
everybody's talking about a vaccine, and that's going to be the magic pill or
Mhm.
whatever. No, I don't think so. I think what actually is going to be really changed is ourselves and the way that we approach each other as human beings. That's the most vital thing, I think, for us.
Right. A crisis doesn't necessarily test or only test our character, but it reveals character, I think, in a lot of ways. And this is our opportunity to reflect and take the time, like you
Mm-hmm.
say, to think about how we're going to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Right.
agree.
I believe we have some questions. Andrew, your words are so inspiring. I can't wait to listen back to this and write it all down. Um, Jean Ashworth Bartle is watching,
Oh,
founder of the
wow.
Toronto Children's Chorus, and she would like to ask you, can composing be taught? Other than having an excellent composer comment on your work and make constructive suggestions, or do your life experience in music, listening to music of great composers and learning the fundamentals, lead to a person who has the gifts of composing?
Whoa. that's a that's, that's a good first question. um, I I personally have never taken composition classes. I have sort of been mentored a little bit, but can composing be taught? I guess so, but I think the most important thing is absorbing yourself in musical languages and listening very carefully. And for instance, to go back when I was a brass player, I did a lot of writing out, transcribing madrigals and motets by hand. And so seeing the
Wow.
lines, seeing, just even visually seeing the lines in a madrigal or polyphony. And that sort of seeped into my consciousness way before I started writing my own compositions. Listening to me is everything. For instance, my favorite contemporary composer is obviously Evo Pärt. And there's something very profound and something very spiritual about his music, obviously. I don't try to copy that style, but I certainly feel that by listening to different styles, that's, to me, that's my sort of learning process. Looking at scores and things like that. But I'm very influenced by other composers' languages and listening to styles. Techniques are important as well too. I try to use a lot of, well, in the past I've used a lot of sort of overtone drones in my music. I love that sound, and I love when you get overtones in a long drone. Um, I think that's, to me, is a big influence on a lot of my music, I think. So, but going back, can it be taught? Yes, it can be, and I think it's important to have feedback and mentorship, and sort of, if you find the right mentor or teacher, I think that can be the biggest influence on your creativity and your music.
Who were your biggest mentors?
Uh, well, I had Glenn Beer for, I don't know if anybody, Glenn Beer, very, very successful and wonderful composer in the early days, was a big influence. Um, but honestly, I didn't have a lot of one-on-one teaching. For conducting, my big mentor was Henry Enbrecht at the University of Manitoba. And for vocal was Mel Braun, who, I'd sung since I was 7 years old, but not until I got to university did I actually have vocal lessons and teaching. So Mel Braun really kind of shone new awareness and my new understanding of choral music. When I got to the University of Manitoba, I was still majoring in trumpet, but I grew up in a pretty ivory tower choral music, the Anglican Church of England style. It was great music. I loved it, but I'd never heard of Penderecki. I'd never heard of Pärt. I'd never done any language outside of Latin or maybe some Italian or German, but it just opened up a whole new, that's why it basically changed my direction in music when I got to university. It's like, wow, I want to be in the choral world. I don't want to, if you're playing in an
So
orchestra
rich.
and a trumpet and you're actually Mozart or Haydn, you're only playing tonic and dominant, and you have you do a couple of notes and you have 100 bar rests and then another couple of notes. So I wasn't for that. Not that I'm taking down people. I have a lot of brass playing friends, but
Yeah, the counting is half the job.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. That's amazing. Let me check here if we have any other questions. Aha. So, do you maybe you can't tell this yet? One of our singers, Jane, is asking, has COVID had an effect on the content of your compositions? You've sort of addressed this in sort of the ways you're thinking more deeply, but do you think it will have a lasting effect on what you're writing about?
That is a good question. Yeah, I think so. Like in terms of like again going back to the idea of like this contemplative time that we're in right now, is that or being isolated. There definitely, I think that I'm thinking a little bit more of what I want to sort of communicate through creating right now. It's sort of it really is kind of the before. I mean, it'll be interesting to see maybe 20 years from now if I can look back at my repertoire. What was it like before and what was it like after? Was there a change? I'm not sure, but I'm trying to be conscious of things, a little bit more conscious of even technical things. I'm trying to have cleaner scores. I'm trying to have more direction sort of by dynamics. And before, I'm a very fluid composer, and I don't do a lot of, just because I did a lot of stuff with Camerata Nova conducted by Mel Braun. I always had a lot of open suggestions for dynamics, tempo. So Mel Braun is probably one of my favorite conductors from my music, I guess, because he's so open to different ideas and will change things.
And
Which
you're
I
in
still
the
want to
room,
continue.
right? You're kind of
Yes.
working with him and with the choir.
Yeah, and he understands what I'm trying to do. So yeah, but just to go back to the question, I think that this time has changed a certain way I listen to music, and I think when I actually get back to full time composing, I think I will probably see a difference. We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. We won't know, I guess, until down the line. Jean is asking once again, do you're a singer, I'm a singer. Do you think it helps when choral composers are trained are trained singers as well?
Oh yeah, and I think that's a big yeah, because we've all seen those scores. We've all like sort of like can tell this person's not a singer.
Right. Oh, sopranos
like
can sing up to beat. I'll just write above the staff the whole piece. Yeah, that's great. My
sometimes I
book
want to
says
write.
they can sing up there.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think that what actually I've always thought the last little while, I'd love to write a piece that has totally throw all the rules that I know at the window and just do a crazy hard piece. But I definitely think that, yes, I think that's very important. Just because choral music is such a particular powerful medium, and this human voice, it's just important. You don't have to be a great singer, I don't think, or whatever, but just the rudimentals of and again, going back to my influence of Renaissance music, and just sort of the way that I approach choral music, I think that's very important to understand. How to sing, and what you want, sort of like how you want to express yourself through choral music. So yes, I think it's very important.
Yeah. Beverly McIver is asking,
Hi,
given
Bev.
your given your love of Baroque music, have you ever explored any Baroque music written in North or South America?
That is a great question. I have explored it, and you, Kathleen, might know this album. Years, maybe it was in the '90s. Chanticleer, the male ensemble from San Francisco, released an album called Mexican Baroque.
Yeah.
It just blew my mind. I didn't know anything about South American so-called Baroque music, and I find that music so exciting, so full of I guess it's sort of a combination of indigenous native people, read the region and the rhythms and the flavor, along with the imported music from Spain and Portugal that ended up, in Mexico. So we've done a couple of concerts with Camerata Nova where we did Mexican polyphony. A lot of that was sort of given to us or guided to us by Douglas Kirk in Montreal, who of course is a fantastic sackbut player, but also a musicologist in that music. So we did a lot of great stuff in the past. I'd like to actually, that question actually makes me think we should get back to doing more of that, because it really it's very exciting music. I love that style actually.
Yeah, and has a distinctly different uh, flavor than the German Baroque stuff or the
Oh,
jazz
and again, to go
classically.
back to the indigenous aspect of it,
Yeah.
there was missions in southern, which is now the southern United States and Mexico and California, where it was all indigenous people. So you get an all indigenous Baroque orchestra and an all indigenous choir. Well,
Wow.
to me, I would just love to know what that sounded like. You know, what did the choir sound like? You know, it would have been incredible. I mean, to me, that's fascinating music, and I'd like to know. I'd like to see a movie about that, or
Mm,
sort of. Um, I think that's unexplored territory for even for people that are deeply immersed into early music. There's still,
yeah.
I'm sure there's probably thousands of part books and
Mm,
music in some of those old cathedrals in Mexico and even the southern United States that needs to be really kind of unearthed and sung again. That's one of the things I love about early music because there's so much
yeah.
that hasn't been discovered or sung or recorded. So,
Have you heard of this research that was happening in Labrador a few years ago, where the Moravian missionaries brought over the brass band tradition, but
yep.
also like there are translations of Handel, including movements from the Messiah, into Inuktitut, and these incredible manuscripts that have been discovered in Labrador of Baroque music that's been
Mm.
translated or rearranged. And I don't know all the details, but it's quite a fascinating sort of intersection between German Baroque music and Canadian Indigenous culture and history. So there's maybe something there too.
Oh, that would be. I have heard of the Moravian tradition. I have a very good friend that knows that history quite
Mm.
well. But I didn't know about sort of the Baroque
Yeah.
and also translating into Nuktutuk,
Yeah,
because
I'm just scraping the surface here. I'm not an expert, but I was made aware of this research a couple years ago.
well, again, there's another project maybe we can dig into because
Mm.
I do know a lot of Inuit friends and I have heard about the brass tradition.
Mm-hmm.
But I certainly think that there's a lot of unearthing even in this country as well. And I'm always fascinated. Like a couple years ago, we did a section of the Thomas Tallis Lamentations, and I translated it into Cree. And of course, it really changes the whole feel of that music when you have just a different language. I'm particularly like love that. It's one of my favorite pieces of music, the Lamentations. Um,
Stunning.
so, but one day I want to do a whole bunch of settings of bird motets into Cree or Ojibwe or even Inuktitut, who knows? But
Wow.
there's lots of things that um, I just like that idea actually.
Yeah, putting it in a new context and
Yes,
making it.
exactly.
Yeah. Oh wow, that's amazing. Okay, are you game for a couple more questions?
Definitely, definitely.
All right. Oh, we have a singer from our choir, John, who is wondering if I have plans to program anything by Andrew Balfour, and the answer is yes. We have a commission in the works for our 50th anniversary, maybe down the line, when more details to come. But yes is the overwhelming answer that we plan to work with you.
That'd be so great.
It would be awesome. It would be just so great and a big one. Let's do it. Let's make a big piece happen. I think we talked about a companion to Beethoven 9.
Oh, wow.
So
That's
yeah,
pretty big
just jog your
shoes to
memory.
follow.
Your piece will be first.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Definitely priority. Stu, we have two more really good questions, and I think this will be a great way to wrap up. Stu Bodran is in our base section, and he says, how do you find your indigenous and non-indigenous backgrounds, or history in your life influencing your composition? Do you choose one or the other? Do you consciously blend them? Can you talk about that process for you?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm finding like when I first started out, I was basically leaning more into my sort of Eurocentric background in music. As I got to know myself or my blood memories, so to speak, I started to be more conscious of sort of how I wanted to approach a piece of music or a project. I don't particularly to consider myself an indigenous composer so much as the fact that I'm Andrew first. but I certainly, and I don't really feel that my music sounds indigenous particularly, but that's not the point, I think. And it's sort of is what I do if I take a project, going back to that first project, Wawatewak, Northern Lights, was like, I had an idea, I had a sense of how I wanted to present it, and that came first. Having said that, I am still influenced a lot by, when I hear a powwow drum, when I hear like even this morning, just before I talked to you, I saw a video. My friend Cheryl from Edmonton did a video called "One Rattle, One People," and it's all these women singers, and they're passing a rattle, on the screen to another place, and it was beautiful because it's such a beautiful sound. Indigenous perspective of music is so much based into spirituality. It's not just, it wasn't entertainment, or it wasn't soothing, so to speak. It was actually part of their medicine, or is part of their medicine, I should say. And it's part of the spirit world. It's part of sort of a bigger picture than sort of like sitting in a concert hall listening to opera or Beethoven. It's really, that's why I find it so incredibly powerful to listen to even just a hand drum and a singer. And look where that's gone, from something like that to a Tribe Called Red, or Tani Tagak, or Jeremy Dutcher. It's like, not just to use a few examples. It's really led to this idea of a spirituality that's very, very important. So I'm really getting off the original question, but I think it's sort of, I'm more sort of in tune with sort of my blood memories now than I was when I first started composing. So yes, I try to sort of be true to myself. My indigenous spirit, my ancestors, are a big part of where I am right now, and what I'm creating hopefully will continue in the future.
Wow. Thanks, Andrew. Okay, our final words. Samantha Whalen has asked. We've touched on this a little bit much
Hi,
earlier in the
Samantha.
interview.
I love Samantha.
She says, "What advice would you give to anyone who wants to program more Indigenous music, or to organizations that want to commission Indigenous composers?"
Well, that is an excellent question too. I think that the advice is to sort of like, if you're going to do an indigenous piece, sort of like, what is the concert, what's the programming, what's the message you want? If are you going to do a piece about Mother Earth, or a concert about Mother Earth, or whatever, what are the other pieces that are going to be on the program? Definitely consulting with indigenous people in the community if you can. And I think it's important that I've done a lot of juries in the past couple of years, and once in a while you'll get a project that you kind of like, I don't know, is this checking off the box, or is this like kind of, I get the fact that I encourage people to explore into this culture, and to but also it's difficult to say it in the right words, but I think it's really important to sort of collaborate your ideas, and to sort of go to indigenous people, artists or elders or communities, to sort of feel things out, or to try to figure out what you want to say. If you want to do a concert based on the beauty of Earth, or Mother Earth, or the planet, um, why do you want to put an indigenous piece in there? What does it mean to you? And these are important questions. Or why, actually, first of all, why do you want to do an indigenous piece? Is that something you want to do because you feel that it's important for the rest of your concert, or do you want to do an all indigenous concert? It's very, I think that, again, talking about allies, Samantha, who answered that question, is an incredible ally, incredible educator, and knows her community in Alberta. So to go back to that question, it is very important to sort of reach out to your community. Even if indigenous people don't, flock to choral concerts or orchestra or opera things, you'll be surprised about sort of the perspective they can give you, and it's important. And going back to what I said earlier on, is that there is a new wave of composers that are coming up that speak the language, have the blood, know the culture, and that's only going to make, I think, our choral community as general more powerful, and more sort of reflective of, even if it's tough issues that we're talking about, that is important to our choral community and our country in general, I think.
Wow. Thank you so much, Andrew. I need to sit with all of your answers, I think, all day. So much insight here. I think the word collaboration was mentioned maybe more than any other word,
Mm.
and context. And there's just so many lessons here. We are going to be proceeding in some form with our choral creation lab, that you've so kindly agreed to be a composer mentor
Mm.
in this year. So if you're a young composer out there and you're looking for the opportunity to learn from this amazing composer here, stay tuned for info about that. And we are just so grateful that you've taken your time today, Andrew, to speak with us.
Oh, McWitch, it's been so great to stop reading the newspaper. It just this has inspired me as well too, just to sort of talk to you, and we're definitely like sort of, I think we're, even though we're separated, all of our, conductors, choristers, musicians. Thank God for technology. If we didn't have internet, we'd be big
No
problems. Like,
kidding.
but I still feel connected to people, and sharing ideas and listening to. And we've been seeing some great stuff online, haven't we? Like
Yeah.
virtual choirs and ideas. So
The
I love it.
creativity is really amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. We will follow up soon. Let's do this again sometime, and we'll stay in touch. Take
Excellent.
care.
Yeah, Miigwech, all the best, everybody. Stay safe.